Tonight, the unthinkable happened, and the world will never look at Middle Eastern air power the same way again. In the span of a single night, 40 of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever constructed, the F-35 Adir, the crown jewel of Israeli air superiority, each unit worth over $100 million, were destroyed on the ground before a single pilot could reach a cockpit. $4 billion in American-built aerospace technology vaporized in darkness, not by a peer military with aircraft carriers and satellite constellations, by Iran, by a nation that Washington has spent 5 decades trying to strangle through sanctions, covert operations, and relentless diplomatic pressure. The instrument of destruction was the Fath 360, a precision ballistic missile system that the Western defense establishment had largely dismissed as a regional nuisance, a short-range weapon, a propaganda piece, something to be intercepted, neutralized, managed. Last night, that dismissal cost Israel its entire forward airstrike capability in a single operational window. Nevatim Air Base, the primary home of Israel's F-35 fleet and the launch point for every major Israeli airstrike across the region, was hit by a coordinated salvo so precise, so compressed in timeline, and so overwhelming in volume that Iron Dome, David's Sling, and every layer of layered defense Israel possessed could not prevent the catastrophe from unfolding. By the time the smoke cleared over the Negev desert, the strategic equation of the Middle East had been permanently rewritten. Israel had entered the night as the dominant air power in the region. It exited the night as a nation without an offensive air force. And Washington, which had guaranteed Israel's qualitative military edge as a cornerstone of American foreign policy for half a century, found itself staring at a gap in its regional architecture that no emergency resupply can fill overnight. Tonight's analysis takes you inside the strike. We will break down the Fath 360's technical architecture and why it defeated every defense system thrown against it. We will examine how Iran planned and executed a simultaneous multi-base assault without triggering early warning until it was too late. We will assess what the loss of 40 F-35s means for Israel's capacity to continue operating across every theater it is currently engaged in, and we will map the geopolitical shockwave now radiating outward from this single night, reaching Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and every Gulf capital simultaneously. The truth of what happened last night is more consequential than anything the mainstream defense media is currently willing to say out loud. Before we go further, if this channel is giving you analysis that cuts deeper than what you're finding anywhere else, hit like, subscribe, and drop your sharpest assessment in the comments. Every engagement keeps this work independent and sharp. 3 questions will anchor tonight's full analysis. First, how did Iran execute a coordinated strike across multiple hardened Israeli air bases simultaneously without triggering an adequate early warning response? Second, what is the Fath 360 actually capable of, and why did the most expensive missile defense architecture in the Middle East fail to stop it? Third, with Israel's F-35 fleet destroyed and its offensive air capacity gutted, what comes next, and does Washington have any realistic response that doesn't risk igniting a full regional war? The answers are not comfortable, but they are necessary. If you have been following this channel through the escalating sequence of events across the past several weeks, you already understand that what we are witnessing is not a series of isolated military incidents. It is a structured, patient, methodically executed campaign to fundamentally alter the balance of power across the Middle East, and last night represented its most consequential single operation. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Share this analysis with anyone who is serious about understanding what is actually happening. The comments section is open. Tell me what you think the next move looks like from Tehran, from Tel Aviv,
and from Washington. The strike, what actually happened at Nevatim and beyond. To understand the full magnitude of last night, you need to understand what Nevatim Air Base actually represents within Israel's military architecture. This is not simply an airfield. Nevatim is the operational heart of Israeli air dominance across the entire region. It houses the majority of Israel's F-35I Adir fleet, the most technologically advanced combat aircraft on Earth, equipped with sensor fusion systems, low observable coatings, and networked warfare capabilities that no other air force in the Middle East can match. Every major Israeli airstrike against Iranian assets in Syria over the past several years originated from Nevatim. Every deep strike mission against Hezbollah's precision missile manufacturing infrastructure, every covert penetration of defended airspace, it all flows through Nevatim. Destroying Nevatim's flight line is not merely destroying aircraft, it is destroying Israel's ability to project offensive power across the entire regional chessboard simultaneously. Iran understood this with absolute clarity. The targeting logic behind last night's operation was not random. It was the product of years of intelligence collection, operational planning, and patient preparation for exactly this moment. The strike sequence began at 2:17 in the morning local time, a timing choice that was itself a deliberate calculation. Israeli air defense crews were at their lowest alert readiness. The watch rotation had just changed. Processing speed at radar stations and command centers was at its overnight minimum. This is not coincidence. Iranian operational planners selected the launch window based on detailed knowledge of Israeli defense cycle patterns, knowledge accumulated through years of electronic intelligence collection, drone overflights, and human intelligence networks that Western analysts consistently underestimated. The opening phase of the assault involved a wave of Decoy UAVs, small, low observable platforms that flooded the radar environment with targets simultaneously. Israeli air defense radar networks were suddenly processing hundreds of incoming signatures from multiple approach vectors. The computer systems managing Iron Dome battery allocation and David's Sling intercept assignment were thrown into a prioritization overload that military systems engineers call saturation paralysis. Every battery in the network began cycling through target assignment sequences faster than its reload capacity could support. This is the trap. While every available interceptor in northern and central Israel was being committed to the Decoy wave, the Fath 360 salvos were already airborne from launch positions in western Iran and from mobile platforms pre-positioned through Iraqi territory, locations that Israeli early warning arrays were not adequately oriented to cover at the angles of approach that were used. The Fath 360 missiles arrived in groups of 8 to 12, targeted against specific hardened shelters within the Nevatim complex. The timing compression between the first impact and the last was under 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, Israel had no realistic path to an effective coordinated response. The base's internal alert system was still processing the initial warning when the second and third salvos were already in terminal descent. Simultaneously, and this is the element that most shocked IDF command, a parallel strike package hit Ramon Air Base in the southern Negev, where Israel had pre-positioned a reserve contingent of F-35s and conventional F-16 aircraft as a dispersal measure following earlier escalation warnings. The fact that Iran knew about this dispersal, knew the precise locations within Ramon where the aircraft had been relocated, represents an intelligence penetration of Israeli operational security at a depth that has not been publicly acknowledged by any official Israeli source. But the impact craters tell the story that the press releases do not. By 2:47 in the morning, 30 minutes after the first launch detection, the operational assessment reaching IDF Air Force headquarters contained numbers that commanders initially refused to believe. 40 aircraft confirmed destroyed or critically damaged, 3 hardened shelter complexes at Nevatim rendered structurally compromised, the primary fuel and munitions storage node at the base hit and burning. Ramon's dispersal area struck with comparable accuracy. Israel's offensive air capability, the instrument upon which every component of its regional strategy depends, had been effectively neutralized in a single half-hour operational window. The magnitude of this achievement cannot be
overstated by reference to any previous precedent in Middle Eastern military history. In the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel destroyed the Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian air forces in a preemptive strike that lasted approximately 3 hours. Last night, Iran executed the functional equivalent, destroying Israel's most capable aircraft on the ground in 30 minutes with ballistic missiles from a distance of over 1,000 kilometers against an adversary that had been on elevated alert for weeks and had every reason to expect a major Iranian military response.
The precision demonstrated is itself the most important military datum of the entire engagement. Fath 360 impacts were concentrated within specific shelter bays, not distributed across the general base area. Missiles were not hitting the runway or the perimeter. They were hitting the exact building coordinates where F-35s were parked and maintained. This level of terminal accuracy, delivered by a ballistic weapon at range, requires targeting data of extraordinary resolution and a guidance system of exceptional capability. Both of those requirements point towards something that Western intelligence has been reluctant to fully acknowledge: the degree to which Iran's precision strike capability has matured over the past 5 years under conditions of complete economic blockade and technological isolation. The Fath 360, the weapon that rewrote the rules. The Fath 360 entered the Western defense analysis community's awareness gradually and without particular alarm. Its stated specifications, a range of approximately 120 kilometers, a solid fuel propulsion system, a reported circular error probable in the single-digit meter range, placed it in the category of short to medium-range precision ballistic systems. Analysts noted it with measured interest. It was cataloged, assessed, and largely filed under the heading of a regional tactical system, useful for hitting fixed targets within a limited operational radius, but not a strategic game-changer in the same category as Iran's longer-range Shahab or Sejil systems. Last night demolished that assessment with the same thoroughness that the missiles themselves demolished Israel's aircraft shelters. What the Western analytical community consistently underweighted was not the Fath 360's range. It was the combination of its terminal guidance architecture, its salvo employment doctrine, and the operational infrastructure Iran had quietly built to deploy it at scale from dispersed and mobile launch platforms across a geography far wider than its nominal range envelope suggested. Let us start with the terminal guidance system, because this is where the Fath 360 separates itself from every previous generation of Iranian ballistic weapons. Conventional ballistic missiles, including earlier Iranian systems, follow a predictable trajectory through most of their flight path. They can be tracked, their impact point can be calculated with sufficient accuracy to assign an intercept solution within the time window available to a competent defense system. This is the foundational assumption on which every component of Israel's layered missile defense architecture was designed. The Fath 360 invalidates that assumption in its final phase of flight. As the missile descends through the terminal phase, an onboard guidance system combining inertial navigation with an electro-optical terminal seeker and a radar altimeter activates and begins comparing the ground signature beneath the missile against a preloaded digital target model. This is not a system that is simply following GPS coordinates. It is a system that is looking at the ground, identifying specific structures, and steering itself toward a designated point on a specific building with an accuracy that GPS alone cannot achieve. And more critically, an accuracy that GPS jamming cannot degrade, because the system is no longer dependent on GPS in its final guidance phase. This terminal seeker architecture explains two things simultaneously. It explains the extraordinary accuracy of last night's strikes, impacts clustered within specific shelter bays rather than distributed across the general base area. And it explains why American GPS jamming operations, which had been running continuously across the region for weeks, produced no meaningful degradation in Iranian strike accuracy. The propulsion system compounds the defense challenge. Solid fuel propellant means the Fath 360 requires no liquid fueling sequence before launch. A mobile launcher can arrive at a pre-surveyed firing position, erect, and launch within minutes. The launch signature, the thermal bloom that satellites and airborne surveillance systems use to detect missile launches, exists for a fraction of the time that liquid fuel systems require. The warning timeline compresses dramatically. Now, layer on top of this the salvo employment doctrine that Iran developed and refined specifically to exploit the reload limitations of Israel's point defense batteries. A single Fath 360 fired against a defended target can be intercepted. The intercept probability is not zero.
Iron Dome and David's Sling are genuine engineering achievements and should not be dismissed, but Iran was not firing single missiles at defended targets. Iran was firing salvos of 8 to 12 missiles against each designated aim point, with the salvo compressed into a launch window of under 90 seconds from a single battery and with multiple batteries targeting the same facilities from different approach vectors simultaneously. Against the salvo of 8 missiles arriving from 2 different approach angles within a 30-second window, a point defense battery faces a mathematics problem that has no good solution. It can engage some of the incoming weapons, it cannot engage all of them, and the missiles that the battery does not engage reach their target. Iran's targeting teams calculated the intercept capacity of each Israeli defense battery in the coverage zone, the number of missiles each battery could engage within a specific time window given its reload cycle, designed their salvo sizes and timing to exceed that capacity by a defined margin. This is not guesswork. This is a careful engineering analysis of the adversary's defense architecture applied to the problem of overwhelming it. The production scale of the Fath 360 program adds a dimension that deserves separate emphasis. These are not exotic, individually hand-assembled weapons produced in small quantities for prestige demonstrations. Iranian manufacturing facilities operating under full sanctions pressure with zero access to Western components or precision machine tooling from sanctioned suppliers have been producing Fath 360 systems at a rate that has quietly built a stockpile of meaningful operational depth. The missiles used last night represent a fraction of Iran's available inventory. This is not a one-time capability demonstration, it is a sustainable strike architecture. The self-reliance dimension of this achievement deserves to be stated clearly because it carries implications that extend far beyond this single conflict. Every component of the Fath propellant chemistry, guidance, electronics, structural materials, manufacturing tooling was developed and produced entirely within Iran. The sanctions architecture that Washington constructed with the explicit intent of preventing Iran from developing exactly this kind of capability has failed in its core objective. Not partially failed, completely failed. What the sanctions actually produced, the outcome that no one in the Western policy establishment wants to state plainly, is an Iranian defense industrial base that is now more self-sufficient, more resilient, and more capable of absorbing external pressure than it would have been if Iran had been allowed to purchase weapon systems freely on the international market.